Let's switch a bit and see what's happening. Well, the CBN, they've stipulated a tiered structure for electronic fund transfers to other banks. Yesterday, we talked about banks' earnings, and especially now that we have a cut in the CRR and the MPR, we expect the banks to do better when it comes to profitability. But then there are questions. The bank's money actually comes from the consumers. They're supposed to give lending, at, well, possibly as cheap as possible interest rates to members of the public. But there are questions as to the charges which consumers have to face when interacting with banks. And we're talking about financial inclusion right now in the country. So everybody should be encouraged to use the banks. But if there are charges, then that might be a discouraging factor. Let's speak to a former director, retired director of the Central Bank of Nigeria, used to be Consumer Protection Department of the CBN. Mr. Kofu Alada joins us from our Abuja studio. Mr. Alada, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning and thanks for having me.
So I believe you can speak freely now. You are retired, so you can tell us exactly what's going on within the CBN. And a lot of Nigerians believe that the CBN is so high for them to reach, even when they have complaints, about bank operations, bank transactions. Yes, I know there are advertised ways that have been shared in the public that you can actually send your complaint to the CBN, but we don't know when we can get answers. So explain to us exactly the priority that CBN gives to consumer protection and consumer rights.
Well, if I hear you very well, if your question is about challenges that Central Bank is having in implementing consumer protection regulations?
Yes, please, go ahead, yes. Okay,
well, I've been quite a while off consumer protection, but I can say that in Nigeria, just like anywhere, the regulations, laws, and guidelines are always available underpinning policies. But the problem has always been implementation, compliance, as you have noted. Challenges range from maybe monitoring of regulations, well-grounded education of the consumers, and maybe prioritization of issues involved in consumer protection. But if there's something we can give it to the Central Bank of Nigeria, that since 2020 thereabout, even though consumer protection duties started in Central Bank in 2012, post global financial crisis. Then post-COVID, it became more prominent as a result of development of digital finance, which has come to stay and is appearing to be the main focus of even investors in financial services business. So I refer to consumer education. What we have found is the fact that major issues revolve around information asymmetry. We know there's inequality, between the banks and their customers in terms of information available. So if you put regulations in place, definitely there are people out there who are ready to actually circumvent these regulations. So issues of the fact that banks and financial institutions are set up for profit, and anything they do will be driven by profit. Though we're expecting that sustainable banking will drive them towards maybe thinking of economic, social, and governance criteria in their banking right now. But a summary of challenges that we'll be having is one, issues of enough capacity in terms of availability of people to ensure that market conduct regulation is implemented. Then, apart from that, even where complaints come in, the myriad of complaints in terms of taxonomy, in terms of even the intricacies involved in some of these complaints. Issues revolve around how do you tackle them with fewer hands that you have over the years and with the increasing rate of these complaints coming in. I think these are some of the challenges that the banks may be having now. However, it's expected that with development in technology and with adoption of a lot of data management capacity by central bank now, because the central bank has lately put so much priority on data-driven regulation, and a lot of things have been done to really take care of these challenges.
All right,
but
Mr.
one thing that is still very, very important is actually consumer education, and that's one area where the industry is actually not doing much. Well, give it to the Bankers Committee. There is actually a subcommittee, of the Bankers Committee that is actually taking care of that, but a lot more actually needs to be done. Now, a lot of reliance has been placed on the media, to do this, but well, he who pays the piper dictates the tune. The media
I guess the media
also make money.
I guess the media, Ms. Alaba, will be. I mean, you give us the resource persons. Let's talk about these issues, because the media is just a platform. We don't hold the opinion. We don't have the information. We really do need the information and the resource persons and experts coming from the other side, and then we can, tell it to Nigerians. I guess for instance, the CBN is talking about Naira abuse, and we had that story right here yesterday. But even when you talk about the Naira abuse, those involved, and if deterrent actions are being taken to discourage others from doing it, then it goes beyond the media to both the CBN and the law agencies who are supposed to follow through, with all of this.
Yeah, I can tell you that I know as a fact that the communication arm of the central bank is also doing a lot, but as everything, a lot more can still be done. You know that from time to time, the finance or financial correspondents are brought into a room, and actually the central bank actually relate with them. But like we said, there's a limitation. Let me just say that we need to place this duty where it belongs, and it actually belongs to the financial institutions themselves. I agree with you that the media has limitations, very, very correct. So, and that's why, well, maybe once in a year during Consumer Week, or maybe literacy day or something, things are done. But to educate the consumer, I think it's a continuous thing. So central bank is doing its bit, but let's ask, what are the banks doing? What do you have on their website? What do you have in some of their adverts and the rest of them? I think maybe I should just digress a bit to talk about, how these banks are supposed to be relating to their customer. So maybe while doing that, some of these issues will also be coming to the fore. As a fact that the regulations require them to be fair and transparent in their dealings with their customers. But how well is this being done? Yes, it is also required that a lot of disclosure needs to take place prior to a contract, during a contract, and post-contract. They need to be responsible in their business conduct with these customers, where lending has happened. And talking about lending, permit me to just digress. You mentioned in your intro about the fact that the central bank has cut rates, recently following the MPC. Fantastic. What that's expected to do? It's supposed to open the floodgate. I want to use the word floodgate for creation of credit by financial institutions. And when you create credit, a lot of issues will follow it. Part of it is, what knowledge does the customer have in borrowing? That is even the least of it. So there are other products that will come online for creation of credit that the customers will need to know more about. So in the process of the banks creating credit, lending to new people, SMEs are supposed to be the greatest beneficiary of this for the development of the economy. So if I have my way, I will actually, the days of sector allocation are gone and should never come back in a liberalized economy. But there should be some moral suasion for lending to SMEs. And when you want to do that, this is where you need more education. The challenges of consumer protection will continue where the education is not so, and education awareness is not so well, it's not giving high priority. This is consumer literacy and awareness is one of the principles, high-level principles of consumer protection around the world. Especially if you look at the G20 OECD high-level principles, which has risen from 9 or 10 that we had before to 12 now. So the question is, how much of this do banks and customers know? How well are the banks training or researching in this particular area? Researches should not just be on product development. Researches should always be about the development of these products vis-a-vis fairness to the customer. So the customers are the focus of the business. Without the customers, where will the banks be? They will be nowhere. The banks cannot lend to themselves, though they can lend to their investors, but the fulcrum, the major part of their business, come from depositors, who are their customers. So, creation of awareness by the banks, alongside central bank, also, because in central bank, I think the last time we have also the national conference on financial literacy has been quite a while. So I think central bank should look into that possibility, because it is a common knowledge that where central bank is out there doing something, everybody wants to know what is happening, especially now that it's doing so well. Yes, rates have been held for almost 5 years. Now we have the rates being cut. We have this inflation taking place, just like around the world. So I think we need to actually latch on the development that is going on. It is not just about cutting rates, which is very, very commendable, the steps taken so far. Yes, we are still working, the central bank is still working to its target, because the major thing that the central bank does now is inflation targeting. So, and the fact that they are moving, the inflation moving downwards now shows progress and some high level rather of success by the Central Bank of Nigeria. So if you are doing all this, so the impact on the common man is what should now be the next target. And who are these people? They are the customers of banks who should be taken care of.
Exactly.
As prescribed in the regulations.
So we're talking about the protection of the rights of these people. And one of the areas where some Nigerians feel that they're being victimized, if I could use that word, is the area of bank charges. Now, I have a list of some of them, and please correct me if I have missed out or added what is not supposed to be there. So, for instance, there's the electronic funds transfer, there's the ATM charges, which is different from on-site and off-site. There's the card maintenance, there's the USSD, which recently experienced a change, and now they charge you from your credits on the phone. There's I think if you're dealing with large currency or large amounts, then there's the cash handling fees, the checkbooks, the hardware token, bill payments via e-channels. And sometimes, for instance, you carry out a transaction on your account, and you get, for now, I think I have even experienced it, you get 2 charges. And sometimes you're like, 1 transaction, 2 charges. Is it to show transparency? Is that how it's supposed to be? And really, a lot of consumers do not know where to bring this matter up. Well, one thing is talking about transparency. The key thing is the fact that the central bank has done well by coming out with the list of these charges, at least as a signpost to guide the way and manners consumers or customers, transact businesses with their banks. Well, if you look at these charges detail, I beg to disagree that you do not have 2 charges. Well, if I saw what you put there very, very correctly, 2 charges on a single transaction. Note that all these charges are not about taxes at all. You understand? Then you have a choice of platform that you are going to use for your transactions and the rest of them. And if I even pick the last item on the USSD and SMS charges, the central bank, the industry, actually had long-running battle with the communication industry over these charges. For quite a long time now, charges were being borne by banks, a little part of it by the customers, So now, what you now have is a scenario where the customer will have to bear a chunky part of this. Yes, you may want to say that we are talking about financial inclusion and you have these charges, but we can also try to understand with the evolving business environment that the banks are operating at. Then again, you also want to look at the fact that
customers too are just being invited to be more disciplined and more discerning in their relationship with their banks. It's not just everything that should be available to you because it is free. You have choices of channels to use. You have to look at which one is much more economical for me. You need to make a lot of decisions. Then we talk about consumer education as well. We expect banks, and I know 1 or 2 banks have posted on their website, and from time to time they do update on these websites, to show these charges and actually educate their customers on how to progress about them. So it's, I won't call it a catch-22 as such scenario where you're talking financial inclusion, then you have charges coming with it. But the vulnerable in the economy actually have their, I won't say their jobs cut out for them, but they already have the areas in which they can operate. But the bigger tickets, the corporates, are discerning enough to actually navigate their way around all these areas. The central bank, I believe, wants to really keep the banks in business. So the banks have to remain in business for them to be able to serve the customers. So the only thing that central bank will not brook is where banks breach the prescribed charges. And as the industry may know, you have recourse, mechanism when these kind of breaches happen. And good news also, well, bad news for the banks, but good news for the consumer is the fact that since the enactment of the Bank and Other Financial Institutions Act 2020, which came on board November 2020, unlike before when penalties were just a slap on the wrist, now it is humongous. So banks, I think, have actually gotten wiser and they want to do their business in a more responsible manner in view of the fact that today, under, I think, Section 95 or thereabout of the BOFIA, the least penalty, the minimum penalty for failing to adhere or comply with regulations, directives, circulars, guidelines of central bank, the minimum is actually 100 million, which, depending on frequency of the breaches, can actually be on day to day. So we had scenarios in the past where even where central banks had already resolved consumer protection issue in favor of customers, banks will still keep on, they will not comply. So because only 2 million was available as penalty in those days. But now you have a scenario where the least central bank can even, the least amount central bank can penalize is actually mandatory. It's 100 million. It's the minimum. So depending on the severity of the offense or infraction, it can rise to billions of naira. And I think the central bank is actually prepared to wield the big stick. And I also know that the banks too do not want this to happen, and they're actually developing policies as required under the CPR, that is Consumer Protection Regulation, for them to develop policies, for protection of consumers. May I also mention that BOFIA in Section 30, for the very first time, had express provision granting the central bank the powers to regulate consumer protection. Because before now, it was actually Section 2D of the CBN Act that central bank was relying on. That is the one that said we should ensure sound financial system in Nigeria. But now, it has now been expanded, pursuant to Section 30 of the BOFIA. And there, the governor now has the power to actually issue guidelines, to engender, transparency towards them and to ensure that people now have confidence in the financial system. Then this power also extends to the fact that you can ensure competition in the system. Then you can also prescribe consumer protection standard, and rules for banks to comply.
All right, Mr. Lada, we know you have a lot of information, and you ended your movement or career in the CBN from the legal, so it's very obvious, and I guess we should be having you more when it comes to educating consumers on their rights and what the CBN is doing. So thank you so much for letting us in on some of that information, retired director from the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mr. Alada.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.